everybody. Welcome to your Lost Wax mold making demo. Today we're going to go through the materials that you'll need to gather for your first mold making, or potentially your second, depending on which class you're in with me. So we're going to go through the materials that you need to grab, the materials that you have in your toolbox, some shared materials that we'll use. And then we're going to talk about affixing your object to either the table or to the coddle. Then after that's done, we're going to show you how to prep the table and prep your object. And then that's probably a good place for this video to pause. And then we'll start a new video and talk about how to mix plaster silica and plaster silica safety. And then we'll make the mold from there. Sound good?
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, notice that in the demo video, my mask is off in here. This is not permission to have your mask off in here when you're working. It is just for the sake of the intelligibility of the video. So let's talk about the materials that you're going to want to have on hand at your workstation. And because you guys all have your own tables to work at, feel free to spread out. Know that this process gets potentially messy, so I would recommend not having any personal belongings or notebooks in the general vicinity of your working area, though having notes around if you need them are fine. Just be aware that things might get a little dirty. Let us go through the materials that I have gathered. So if you look over here, this is the stuff that I've grabbed out of my toolkit, and stuff that you have in your toolkit that you'll want to grab out as well. I have my tube or tub of petroleum jelly, of Vaseline, my Sharpie. I have both my metal scraper and my plastic scraper. I will probably end up using both of these, and it doesn't really matter what size. It's just sort of to the maker's pleasure. I've grabbed a handful of toothpicks and a handful of skewers. And then I also dip some of these skewers in wax, which we'll talk about in a couple minutes. I also grabbed some plastilina oil clay, and also, importantly, I grabbed my N95 mask, because when we mix the refractory material, we'll end up popping this on. That's all the stuff that you're gonna grab out of your toolbox. You might find that you want something else, and then you can grab that out, but this is a good starting kit. The shared tools that you're going to want to grab for this project are something to cut your toothpick or skewers with. So I've grabbed out of the yellow cabinet some tin snips. I also grabbed a bottle of Maxi Hold hairspray. And then I grabbed myself a coddle. And for the purpose of this demo, I've also affixed the Lazy Susan on the bottom of the coddle, so I can turn my object around while I'm making my mold. When you're making your mold, you're welcome to use the Lazy Susan and the coddle. You're also welcome just to make the mold right on the table, and instead of moving the coddle around, you can instead move your body around, which is oftentimes sort of the better way. But the thing that I want to hone in on here is that you want to create some sort of method where you can see all sides of your mold. So it's either moving the coddle that the mold is attached to, or moving your body. So you have access visually to all sides. So we have our finished object. It has been beautifully welded. You watched that in another video. And you also see that I've put on a sprue, so where the wax is, or where the glass is gonna flow in is right at this connection. And then I've also created a larger reservoir to hold the cold wax in the kiln. And we can talk more about sprues for your specific objects in class. I need to affix my object, my wax object, to my mold making surface. So in my case, the coddle. For you, maybe the coddle or the table. So there are two materials that you can use in this class to affix your mold to the table. The first is plastilina. And the second is just wax itself. So I can show you how I would think about putting attaching it to the cottle with the plastilina, but for the purpose of this, I'm going to show you how this happens, and then I'm going to take it off and I'm going to actually affix it with the wax. There are sort of pros and cons to both, and there's kind of no right way to do it. I just want to show you both. So obviously, just to back up a little bit, the reason why we affix your wax positive to the mold making surface is so when you're making your mold, it doesn't move around. Sorry, that's a pretty unpleasant noise. If it moves around, that's a really good way of making your mold unstable, or possibly sort of like slopping plaster silica underneath and then having to carve away so you can access your wax to melt off. So we want to affix it to the table pretty sturdily with one of these two materials. So with the plastilina, you just make a little plastilina snake and then you affix it. And it's a pretty good hold. And then I would do it all the way around and then come and make it really pretty. Pretty good. So I'm going to pull that up. And the reason that there's like maybe the half a reason that I don't love using the plastilina to affix it to the cottle is that you have to dig it out of your wax, out of your mold before you steam out your mold. And that's just one added step, but it's really not that big a deal. So if that way feels better to you, that's fine. With the wax, what I'm going to do is you're going to stay right here, and I'm just going to go get a little rubber container full of liquid wax and carefully bring that over here, and I'll show you how to fix it to the table with wax. All right. Well, no time at all has passed for you, but for me, I've walked over to the wax working station and poured about, I don't want to tip it, but just trust me that there's about 3/4 full of liquid wax in here. And also I had poured a little wax out into another silicone container and just grabbed sort of a thin piece of it here. I'm going to let the liquid wax thicken up just a little bit, so cool down just a little bit, and make a little wax welding stick in the meantime. And I may or may not need that depending. All right, so that is gonna still be pretty liquidy, and I'm gonna be careful about this because I don't wanna make a huge mess, but I'm gonna aim for center and just pour a little puddle. Maybe a little bit more, trying to make it just a little bit bigger than the bottom of my sprue. And then I'm going to rest my sprue inside that puddle. Press down and then use a tool if it's not all the way around, and just sort of continue making sure that all sides are contacted with the wax. So I'm purposefully asking for some overflow here. And it doesn't have to be pretty, it just has to be connected. And then I'm gonna let this stiffen up, and then I'm gonna scrape most of it off so I don't have like this big ugly puddle. And then I can just do a quick affix with the wax welding sticks. So we'll pause the video just for like a minute until this wax is like cool enough to the touch where it's not going to smear everywhere. All right, so that's been, what do you think? Maybe like a minute and a half. And you can see that I'm pressing the wax and it's still warm enough that it's deforming, but it's not leaving too much gunk on my fingers. And I feel like that's kind of a good temperature in which to start carving it off. So I'm going to grab either of my scraping tools. This also might be a good technique to use, like one of your one of your wooden handled like ring tools, and I'm just going to sort of separate the wax from the mass and then just carve along that edge. I'm really going to do my best to not carve into the sprue or even disrupt where the sprue connected to the table. If it dislodges, it's not that big a drama. You'll just add some more wax to adhere it back. But see, it comes up really nicely from the cottle, and then it'll be a nice surface to make your mold on. I'm gonna move some stuff out of my way. I went through all these materials, so now I'll just grab them as I need them. And my working area can be just a little cleaner. I think that'll be nicer. I want to remove like most of the wax off the cottle, so it's just, if anything, a little bit of wax stain, and it'll make my mold making easier, because it'll be easier for me to clean off the cottle in between layers of mold. So I feel pretty good that this is solid, but I'm still going to just go over with my finger and sort of smear down that connection and really make sure that that's like a nice flat adhesion to the cottle. And that'll be the last thing I do here. If it didn't feel like it was good, or if it was moving around a little bit, I would take one of the wax welding sticks that I made, or some of the wax that I pulled off the cottle, and I would just sort of patch till I felt like it was not sort of moving around at all. And it doesn't have to be pretty, because it's the sprue, it's not your object. So all it has to do is be functional. And its function right now is just stick into the cottle. So we're good, that's all done. I'm just gonna put the wax away, let it cool down, and then I can recycle it later. I'm not gonna work with any more wax for this whole process. The only time I'm gonna think about the wax next is getting it out of the mold. All right, so we have our mold attached to our cottle. I did like a pretty mediocre job of centering it, which I will ask you guys to do a better job than I did. Because when we build our mold, it'll be really nice to not have to worry about like going over the sides of the cottle. But you know, filming demos is scary, and I forgot. So the next thing that I'm going to do is that I'm going to make some concentric circles with my Sharpie on my cottle, or if I'm building on the table, on the table. And basically what this is going to do is act as a guide for my mold layers. A lost wax mold is made in 3 layers of refractory material. The first layer is a face coat and is going to be so close to the object that we will not actually build out onto the cottle. So we're only going to make 1, 2 marks with our pen. So first coat, face coat, second coat, strength coat, final coat, jacket coat, which is really like the big strengthening coat. So we're gonna make a line for our strength coat here, and it can be about, I'd say about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch deep away from your object. It doesn't have to be a pretty line, it's just a guide. And then the jacket coat is going to be a little bit thicker, so between 3/4 of an inch to 1 inch. The scale and thickness of your coats changes slightly with the scale of your object. So a teeny tiny object does not need an inch jacket coat. It can take a smaller amount of material. And same way, a much larger object will ask for more material, because this is sort of the layers will add strength. That's done. The next step that we're going to do is we're going to talk about venting. And we'll talk more about this in class because it'll be different for each object. But what I want you to think about is when you're determining venting, you have made these weird and wonderful sculptural objects that probably have a bunch of undercuts, right? They're not bilaterally symmetrical. They have overhangs and underhangs and dips and flanges and spindly bits and whatever. And we're asking glass to flow in from one spout and stationary. So you know how when we pour our waxes into the alginate, and the first time we pour the wax into like a non-symmetrical hollow, we do a face coat where we turn the wax around and spill it so we can get all of the wax up into all of the areas. We can't do that when we're casting glass in the kiln. The glass and the mold are stationary. So instead what we do is we create what we call vents, which allows air passage to push out any bubbles that might get trapped by areas that want to trap air, like overhangs, etc. So again, we'll review this with your objects individually, or we'll troubleshoot as best we can. But basically what you're going to want to do, and I actually find that visualizing it the way it's going to live in the mold is really useful. So is that still in the frame? So this is the way it's going to look when it's in the mold. Sorry, in the kiln. The top of the mold is attached to the coddle. The coddle obviously comes off. And then the mold is sort of this invisible shape that I'm drawing with my hand. And then the wax is the void inside of the mold that the glass fills. And so I'm thinking that the glass is going to fill through the mold, straight down. It's going to enter my object where the sprue is connected to the wax, and then it's going to fill from the lowest point of the mold up, right? So it'll start at the tip of the nose, and then just like water filling a glass slowly, it's going to fill like this as the glass melts into it. So I can imagine there might be parts of that filling portion that could trap bubbles, and the vents are going to help those bubbles escape. So when I'm looking at this object, I am going to predict that because this little area right here is slightly higher than where the sprue connects to my object, that the glass could potentially fill to here and then trap a bubble and not want to, and sort of not be able to fill anymore because it's trapped, right? Glass is flowing from here and flowing to here, and then there's nowhere for this air to escape to. And then I can also imagine the same thing might happen here. So what I'm going to do, is create a mechanical channel that will act as a vent. It will either steam or burn out during the steaming or mold making process. And then you're just gonna have in your mold a little tube. So what we're going to do is that we're going to dip some toothpicks in a little wax. I'm using toothpicks because I don't have very far to go, and I'm just going to connect to my sprue. But I also have the option of connecting to my coddle with longer vents. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, or what you should do with your specific objects. Yeah, so I'm not gonna film this portion. Well, yeah, let's film making the little waxy toothpicks. And I can explain to you why we coat them in wax as well. So let's go over to the wax working station. Come on, everybody. Oh my